Hello, and welcome to session 5B, Documenting the Personal Records of the Modern Soldier. This session is sponsored by Brownlee. I am Shiraz Bathina, and I am a member of the MAC 2021 Program Committee. Before I turn it over to our session presenters, I would like to go over a few logistical details. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available for viewing in approximately 2 weeks. Please use the Zoom Q&A feature to submit your questions. This session also has the chat feature enabled, which you are free to use to make comments or share relevant information with your colleagues, but try to direct questions to the Q&A so they are not missed. I would also like to share MAC's expectations for conduct during the session. Just put that in the chat. By participating in this session, you agree to engage respectfully with the presenter and other session participants. Any type of harassing or disruptive behavior is prohibited, including but not limited to abusive or derogatory comments, slurs or epithets, threats or acts of violence, intimidation, misgendering, or excessive comments not pertinent to the topic at hand. We will be monitoring the chat throughout the webinar, and if anyone engages in harassing or disruptive behavior, that person will be removed. Thank you for following these guidelines. Finally, you are welcome and encouraged to share your conference experiences via social media. I will be adding to the chat the suggested conference hashtags. Thank you, and now I will turn it over to Edward.
Great, thank you very much. We're very excited and happy to be here at MAC, even though, of course, it is virtual. I actually recognize a lot of the names in the participant list, as I'm originally from Milwaukee and had many years going to MAC and miss it quite dearly. But we're very thankful for this opportunity that the virtual conference allows us to present actually at multiple conferences in the course of a week throughout the country without traveling. So today we're going to be talking about the Virtual Footlocker Project and some of the findings that we've had here in the past year, a couple of years, related to how modern soldiers are documenting their times during service and how archives need to really be aware of this to assist with the preservation of these materials. At the end of our presentation, there'll be plenty of time for us to have a little Q&A and discussion. So as the moderator and host had stated, if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A section and we will discuss them at the end. For the time being, I will hand it over to one of my colleagues, Gillian, who will get us started.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gillian Brownlee. Thank you for being here with us today as we discuss the preliminary results from the Virtual Footlocker Project. So, I'm sorry, before we go into details, we have a basic summary here of the project. In its entirety, the Virtual Footlocker focuses on the development of an open source cross-system platform system for capturing and preserving the personal communication and documentary record of the modern soldier. As I said, my name is Gillian Brownlee. I'm the graduate assistant for the project. You've already heard from Dr. Ed Benoit, who is our project director, and in just a little bit, you'll be hearing from Dr. Allan Martell, who is our postdoctoral researcher on the project. We're currently in phase 2 of the project. Phase 1 consisted of an online survey of veterans and active duty military members. Dr. Benoit published findings from phase 1 in 2017. Phase 2 is being funded by an IMLS grant, which allowed Dr. Benoit to bring Dr. Martell and I onto the project, form an advisory board, and conduct focus groups, which I'll go into more detail about on the next slide. We finished the last of the groups in October and are now in the analysis and technical mapping stage. From there, we'll begin development of a curriculum that will hopefully benefit both archivists and veterans. We conducted 22 focus groups, 4 per branch, with 2 groups consisting of officers and 2 consisting of enlisted members. 2 focus groups were made up of entirely women, 1 for officers, 1 for enlisted. These groups lasted for up to an hour and a half, and each participant was compensated $150. Originally, these groups were going to be conducted in person in 6 different locations around the country, but then the pandemic hit, so we moved the sessions to Zoom, which worked out for the best, really, because with that, we could allow military members from all over the country to participate, not just in those 6 locations we had picked out. We asked them questions about their time in service, specifically how they stored any keepsakes, digital or analog, and what they planned to do with those keepsakes, and also how they communicated with friends and family. Once the groups were done, we used open coding to analyze the transcripts. We wound up with 99 participants total. 30% were officers, 4% were warrant officers, and 66% were enlisted. 26% were Army, 25% were Air Force, 19% were Navy, 15% were Marines, and 15% were Coast Guard. We had a little bit of trouble recruiting from the Marines and Coast Guard, but we worked with what we had. Our goal when recruiting was to reflect the demographics of each branch of the military. In the end, we wound up with 76% of the participants being white and 24% non-white, 43% female, 56% male, and 1% other. And now I'll pass this back to Dr. Benoit, who will tell you all about the analysis and coding of the results.
Thanks, Gillian. I got to click that screen again. There we go. So for any of you who have done any qualitative research, you know, open coding, we derive the codes from the data itself. So we take a look at what the participants were talking about and then create a scheme based on that. Now, with such a large data set, this is a very rich coding scheme. We had 14 major headings with 225 individual subheadings under these. I'm obviously not going to go into each of these in great detail, but I do want to note that we in total had over 3,000 unique references and about roughly 2,300 cases. So it's important here that I highlight the difference between the two. A unique reference was anytime we coded a bit of information, whereas the cases are how many participants noted something. So for example, if a participant throughout the course of a focus group talked about tech issues 3 times, that would be 3 separate references, but only 1 case. The reason this comes into play will be in a second when we actually look at some of the counts. So here the chart is just an overview of the breakdown of how the codes aligned in the data. For the most part, people talked about record keeping habits, their concerns, and reflections, with some other issues being brought up as well. So without context, this list is kind of, well, not all that helpful, but I do know people like top 10 lists. So here are the most common codes by case. And at the top is photos and videos, followed by privacy, clothes, digital printouts, etc. Again, this really isn't that helpful without some of the context that we'll be giving you here in a second. One of the nice things about the number of participants we had 99 participants, just one short of a good perfect 100, which would have meant that all of the count numbers here would have also equated to percent, but they're very close. So for example, phone calls being 41 indicates that 41 of our participants talked about phone calls, 41 out of the 99. So you can interpret this as being very close to percentage, even though it is slightly different. Now with this slide and this graph, you can see that there's a wide variety of different communication techniques that are at play. There were many more listed, but these are the top ones. Phone calls, emails, Facebook did make it at 30% here with social media, voice over IP and texting, as well as physical analog letters and packages. For more context, here are a few direct quotes. Participant 2 noted, when I was in Germany, I would get homesick. There was a payphone right off base, and I would put that mark in there, and I would dial Homer National Bank time and temperature. And the mark would last just enough time for me to hear the time and temperature at the Homer National Bank. And that kind of made my day, that I was listening to somebody back home, so to speak. Another participant noted, personally, I stuck with letters in the beginning. And then for family members that didn't have phones, after the letters, it all went strictly digital. I mean, it was way too easy to just text or call family members if they had the means to do so. Another participant highlighted the difference between stateside and deployed activities, saying, well, deployed, obviously, I did things differently. There was no other choice but snail mail. And that's what actually started me to do the journal, is that I, of course, writing letters back and forth to family members. Another participant highlighted how much they loved getting postcards and using postcards, not just for communication, but also for something to look at outside of what they were seeing on a day-to-day activity. Another area that I want to highlight here are the concerns. A lot of our participants, the military members, really stressed a concern over privacy, as you can see here in this chart. In one case, a participant highlighted that they were in special operations, so they really can't share that stuff. This was something that came up multiple times, the issue of confidentiality, of classification, and issues like that. Another person noted, just because so many people don't understand that the need for privacy for certain things. But at the same point, one of our participants really highlighted the conundrum. This person noted, yeah, DC is going to need pictures for their museums. They're going to need things that were essentially completely blocked for us to share from 9/11 forward. And even before then, in the late 90s and stuff like that. And what are they going to put? The quote here actually continues on to talk about how, because this material was prevented from being captured, being stored, that in the future, there won't be the same documentary record as with World War II or Vietnam. When considering how military members are disposing and storing their materials, it should not come to any surprise that a lot of it's in closets and in boxes. But it's also in the cloud, it's on social media, it's on local drives, including a lot of participants noted they have hard drives from old computers that they removed and don't have any access to anymore. One participant noted that everything's in the garage and it's there on purpose because they have to prepare to go down and get that stuff out because they'll be going down memory lane and it's triggering for them. Another participant had backed up a lot of their materials on PhotoBucket. And this is another thing that came up again and again, storing things in the cloud, but then forgetting their passwords and not being able to access them again. Yet another participant had their Facebook account hacked and lost all their photos. Another key issue that came up in our discussions were some of the problems related to moving in the military. As a veteran myself, I experienced this, and I was not surprised to see this come up again and again. We frequently heard this comment that when changing duty stations and using military relocation, things got lost. Here, participant 54 noted it. Number 55, every PCS move or permanent change of station, there are things that they pack that they bring with them personally rather than shipping them with the military. Another person referenced that it's kind of a roulette wheel to see what's going to go missing. Also, in dealing with loss is this perception amongst military members that they really wish they would have known then what they know now about how to properly store things, where to store them, and how to preserve them. From a record-keeping perspective, the main thing is photographs. But here I want to highlight the wide variety of different ways that people were documenting their time in service. And what we came across was not just the communication avenues and photographs and letters and things like that, but also the importance of three-dimensional objects, trinkets, military coins, jars of dirt, the importance of the military members' uniforms and their boots, and things that they've collected along the way. As far as formats, a lot of it is now digital. There is still, however, a good chunk that is analog and has not been converted over to digital as far as initial capture. When reflecting back on why they value these materials so much, it really is that connection to their personal memories. As one participant noted, a lot of these items kind of attach in our memory the blood, sweat, and tears that we worked towards. Military members use these materials for display, for reminiscing, but also as conversation starters, and a few mentioned donation to museums and archives, as well as for educational purposes. So overall, there is far too much rich data for us to just summarize here. But some of the key findings. We discovered something called Love Me binders, which my colleague Allan will be talking about here in a second. We also, as I noted, saw the impact of frequent moves between duty stations, as well as deployments. The fact that the military loses things frequently and there's limited space to move things from place to place, and this leads to a lot of loss. There's not been a complete shift to digital, and there's this combination of artifacts as well as records. But perhaps the biggest thing that we're taking away from this is the need for direction much more early in the process, at the point of records creation, while military members are actively serving. And we'll come back to that as well. But right now, I want to hand things over to Allan, who will tell you all about what Love Me binders are and why they're important. Allan?
Thank you, Ed. Hi, everyone. My name is Allan Martell. So I am a postdoctoral researcher at the School of Library and Information Science at Louisiana State. I work with Ed and with Gillian on this project. And I would like to talk to you a bit more about this interesting phenomenon of the Love Me binder, which we found throughout our presentation. So the thing is, Love Me binders are a kind of personal a type of personal collection of information that veterans are required to take. And this is because they have certain challenges that are slightly different from the general population. So let's begin first by looking at this case about the type of problems that a particular veteran is facing. So in this case, let's situate ourselves for a second with a feature phone on the context of the Iraq War, which started, if I remember correctly, early in 2003. So here is a quote: "Around the beginning of the Iraq War, digital media just exploded so much. And unfortunately, some of the stuff has already been lost, and a lot more will be lost because people just don't know how to preserve this stuff and don't think about it." So next slide. So again, anything that can get people to think about it closer to the point of generating these artifacts and media and stuff is great. In this case, what we can see is essentially that early in the 2000s, that's the moment when the percentage of digital born information begins to exponentially increase, and that essentially coincides with the advent or with the increase in ubiquitous computing, the expansion of the internet, and also the gradual increase of mobile devices. And so in the case of the veterans, it will make sense that they started to notice these more prominently during the context of the Iraq War, because that's essentially the main military event that took place for the US Army veterans, right? And then, so we have this challenge. They notice that their records are now moving mostly to the digital realm, and that they are having trouble keeping up with that type of information. Then there is, and this also poses another challenge, which is how do they preserve the information and avoid losing it? So let's check another quote. "The digital stuff I had primarily on thumb drives, and I had like these huge terabytes when they were like ginormous. Now you can get nice size ones that are small. But I lost that one in a move, and that one hurt my heart. I was like, no, I lost everything. Our movies we watched, the random billions of songs you downloaded just to keep your mind occupied that we used to play in our backgrounds, all of that got lost in the move, and I was devastated. I think I dropped a few cellular tears for that." And so in this case, first, we're bringing back the issue that Ed had mentioned earlier about how losing information is a major challenge related to moves. But also, we're seeing in this case, we're basically zeroing in on the fact that now with the advent of digital information, the risks about losing stuff, especially in the context of a move, also change. Because then what happens is, even if your stuff arrives, let's say that you pack a hard drive and it arrives, then the problem is if the thing got damaged on the way, then it doesn't really matter if it arrives or not, right? It's a whole different layer of caretaking that it's required now. And another situations in which veterans would lose information is basically because they didn't take the time to preserve it as they were still active in service. And this is something that the people who mentioned this, most of them actually lamented not having done so. And then, of course, we mentioned the moving, and then misplacing records was also a possibility. You put something somewhere and then you forget, or just losing access. This is, and I think Ed gave a very good example, like either because you had a password to access some cloud service, and then you lost that password, or perhaps you didn't log in enough, often enough, and then per the policies of the particular service, then your account got deleted and all your information in that account with it. Occasionally, it may also be referring to passwords across devices. Now, the thing is, the context that the veterans are facing, as I mentioned earlier, it's a slightly different from the context that members of the general population face. So let's take a look. First of all, the issue is that veterans, the government does not do a great job at keeping information about veterans. First of all, when it comes to the issue of health conditions, especially PTSD, it has been documented that the instances of PTSD that get actually documented by healthcare providers are mostly the ones that have the highest range of symptoms. But for people who have mid to low degrees of symptoms of PTSD, then those don't get registered as such, and therefore they may not get the treatment that they deserve. So there is a problem in how people register events at the institutional level, and then that may affect the type of benefits that the veterans can receive. Then the other layer is that the veterans need to access, they need proof of their service to access records. And because the government often don't do a very good job of keeping that information, a veteran may go to the VA at the end of right at the end of the service, and then the government may just not have any information to back up the claim that they have served, or the claim may be inaccurate. For instance, we got a case, at least one of our participants reported that he had been, he appeared in the VA records as discharged with dishonor. And that meant that he was not entitled to certain benefits. And he was able, because he was lucky enough to, he was careful enough to have documented his service. So he was able to provide documentary evidence that he was actually charged with honor. And therefore he was able to correct his record. But the burden of doing so was on him as a veteran rather than on the government. And that means that the veterans now need to keep track of their own records. And this is where the log binders enter into the picture. So let's take a look. The daily journal that I kept, especially when I was deployed, I used that to help when I was going through the process of getting a certain percentage based on different things that were wrong with me from being deployed twice and the regular day-to-day in the Army. I was able to go back to exact dates and times when certain events happened, which aided in that process, because on the flip side, the Army didn't do a very good job, didn't keep very good records of what I did and didn't do and what went on. So that was a huge help to me when it came to getting my percentage for my disabilities that I have, including my PTSD. I think at a greater rate, just because I did have these records myself. I wasn't relying on what the Army remembered or what I could remember from memory. So that was really instrumental for me. And so we can notice how it can be a really life-changing experience to keep track of their information. And the lobby binder just happens to be a particular instrument that active service members are currently now being encouraged to keep so that they can keep track of their information. And the format that the lobby binders take can vary. So for instance, one of the most common is the 3-ring binder that you can find in any office context, where you would store mostly documentary information. In some cases, as we see in the image, people keep a filing cabinet. And in other cases, a filing cabinet like you will find in an office. And then, as we see in the image, some people will have a footlocker. And so this is important. In fact, the name of our research project, the Virtual Footlocker, comes precisely from this practice. So from many, many years, probably decades, our active service members have been keeping footlockers, which is a storage space that they can have and they can carry around with them as they relocate. And this is important because then they can not only keep records, but also objects. And the idea is there is not an equivalent for that for the digital realm. And with this project, we're just trying to figure out what would that equivalent look like. Okay, and so what kinds of records would people keep in their log binders? One of them is among the most common. This is not a comprehensive list, but among the most common, you will have the discharge papers, the DD-214, which is a form that basically summarizes all the information related to a particular individual's service when they retire. And then school certificates, awards, annual reviews, travel orders, PCS orders. These are the orders that for permanent change of station. So it's when service members are ordered to change their permanent location. And then how do they use it? Well, we notice already how, for practical purposes like accessing healthcare or other types of benefits, it's very important. But and that's more on the pragmatic side. But there are other uses that are more symbolic in nature. So let's take a look. For me, I like to keep just so when my son gets older, he can see it and be like, whoa, my mom's a badass. I mean, I'm gonna remind him as long as I live that I am a badass, but just so he can see all the stuff we have. My husband's grandpa, he still has stuff from when he was in, and he actually went through it with him not too long. So it's just kind of nice to go back and look and see what you've been through and all the experiences you've had while you served. And so in this case, what we can see is that it's not just the practical access to benefits, it's also an opportunity to reminisce, to remember, to yearn, to experience all the emotions, like reliving the experience. And it's also an opportunity to find that in keeping this stuff and in reminiscing, veterans also feel like they are part of something larger, that they are than themselves, than their individual story and their individual life. They are actually leaving a legacy for their children and future descendants about what they did, what they accomplished.
Thanks, Allan. So coming back together here, I want to talk briefly about where we're going to go from here. As I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of data and we are currently still analyzing it. Because we had a significant population size, we're able to further break down this data to look at, are there differences between officer and enlisted, between the various branches, based on age, gender, race. There's also a very interesting analysis that Gillian is conducting separately, looking at a social media platform called Together We Served. This is a platform that on one hand is very similar to Facebook as far as it being, it's social media. You have walls, you can share stories and upload photos and videos, but it's restricted to veterans and active duty military. However, there is also a side that loved ones of deceased military can upload their stories as well. But as a social media platform, it actually seems to be more about the preservation of these records. And so Gillian's been looking at the ins and outs of this platform to get a better sense of what's going on here. Also looking at things like the end user license agreement, the privacy statements, what happens with these images, things of that nature. Moving forward, initially, we thought that the next step in our overall project would be developing some sort of software application, cloud-based preservation capturing system, something like that. But through our focus groups and our analysis, we realized there is a much more immediate need. And this is to develop or to work with active duty military and veterans to educate them more on issues of how do you store things properly? What are some of the digital preservation issues? And doing so much sooner in the process than is currently being done. As such, we are moving towards developing a curriculum both for archivists as well as the military members. From the archival side, it would be training archivists in how to conduct community-based activities. Things like perhaps having a Love Me Binder digitization day or outreach activities in their own community. For the military, it is actually coming up with and developing a curriculum for early intervention that can be deployed both on base, but also through various veteran service organizations that we can partner with. Of course, once we develop this, we will be deploying it. Thankfully, because of our IMLS funding, we can do this for free and make sure that it is publicly available to anybody. We'll then promote these materials. Again, we'll go to conferences, we'll probably do some workshops and publish, and then all of our data from our analysis will be made publicly available for future research as well. You can follow us on our website as well as all of our social medias. The first @ is our Twitter, the second is our Instagram, and as we move into the deployment phase, we'll be actually putting a lot more information out there. A few quick references at the end, but with that, I would like to open this up. We have plenty of time for questions and answers and for discussion, but I'm going to stop sharing so that we can come on and discuss those. If you do have a question, please post it in the Q&A area and we'd be more than happy to address it. This first, well, there was a question earlier in the chat that I did want to get back to. And that was, Allan, I missed an important point in your talk. Has the military formally encouraged servicemen and women to manage their own records?
Yeah, so as I understand it, what happens is when active service members start, they are early on in their service, they are actively encouraged by their officers. But I am not aware, I don't know whether this is more like an internal, informal piece of the culture of the Armed Forces, or if it is like a formal policy that is going on.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. When we discussed this with our participants, most of the enlisted talked about how it was their senior, the NCOs, that were the ones to tell them about creating Love Me binders. Officers also mentioned this, that they were telling junior officers and enlisted about this. So it would be interesting to see if this is an official. I don't think it's an official policy. I think it's more of a community practice that could be codified through our work. Okay, question in the Q&A area. Is that social media platform being used by a lot of people? Who is providing it? And is it ad revenue based like Facebook? Great question. Gillian, I hand it over to you.
Hi. So according to their website, they have about 2 million members. It sounds like a lot. I don't see that a lot of people are very active on it. They really are using it as more of a place to store their pictures and their information rather than as a place to interact. And there's a few word association games going on the forum, that kind of thing. But yeah, there are around 2 million profiles. As far as who's providing it, it was founded by a guy named Brian Foster, whose father was in the military. And so he put the whole thing together back in 2003. And they do have partnerships with other places. I don't have the list with me right at this second. But their privacy policies seem to be pretty, airtight. They don't really sell the people's information. So I'm sure there is some ad revenue going on. They are very protective of people's information, which is cool. Hope that kind of helps.
Yeah, and I would just actually, so we've been looking at the emails that get sent out, and
Yeah.
it appears the third party are military specific.
Yes.
Things like USAA, the Stars and Stripe magazine.
The Combat Helicopter Pilots Association, the Flying Cross. Yeah, those are the main ones.
Yeah, so, and because we have a quick second, I'm losing where all my Zooms are. So this is the actual website.
There you go.
And you can see how, yeah, it looks like very Facebooky.
Yeah.
Another interesting thing about that website is that, okay, as a veteran, I get routine emails from the VA, and either the VA is accepting advertising money from them to include them in the email, or the VA is actively promoting that website. I was never quite clear about that, so that is something else that's very interesting about it. Any other questions? Well, we also have a second. So in a previous presentation that we did, I happened to be at home and I had my version of a Love Me binder next to me, but I am in my office today, so we could play Where's Waldo, and people can try and find me on this. Trust me, my parents couldn't find me on this.
That is funny.
Yeah, but yeah, there's nothing better than Where's Waldo when everybody looks the same. Anything else? Looking forward to seeing the educational outreach materials you create. Thank you. We're very much looking forward to it as well. Something I'll note here, and this is just a suggestion for everybody else moving forward. One of the best things, our best personal resource has been our advisory board. It has both academics and practicing archivists on it, practitioners, as well as veterans and representation from veteran service organizations like Wounded Warrior Project, the USO. We've also had support from the Library of Congress Veterans History Project, although as a federal grant, they could not formally be attached to the project. And their input and feedback has been invaluable along this process. Okay, something in the chat. As a Women Army Corps veteran, thank you for this presentation. You're welcome. Okay, well, last call for any questions or comments. Allan, Gillian, did I miss anything that you want to talk about?
Well, I think you did mention something. Oh wait, there is something in the queue. Oh no. Well, there is something that I think we still need to grapple with, which is given the proposal that we have, the intention that we have of eventually trying to create some sort of platform, or at least originally in the project that was something in the cards. But we did notice in our data that veterans have such concern for privacy, which makes sense, right? And so how to handle that moving forward when it comes to the design part of the project, I guess, which is still probably at least 1 year down the line, but it's still something that we really want to think through, right?
Yeah, and one aspect there that I've thought about is something akin to the Curator project, which really just pulled together existing resources into a package. But I think it's important that as we work through that, it would be something that veterans could install locally so that they would have full control over their data. And I think that would be a very important thing.
Yeah.
Okay, with that, I think we will let people go to lunch a little early.
Yeah, so I just had a quick thing to finish up with. So for everybody, thank you for attending. Don't forget to check out our virtual posters and tours during your downtime. We also want your feedback, so please take a few minutes to complete our MAC 2021 survey when it arrives via email next week. And thank you so much to this panel and for everyone who attended, and we'll have a great day. See ya.
Yes, thank you.
Woohoo, we did it.
Yep, I think we can just sign off. So
Okay.
All right.
I'm gonna go where it's warmer, and that fits.
I'm gonna go eat some food.
Yes, that too.
Yeah. Bye-bye.